All right, I'm just going to introduce our co-chairs, Allison Patronell and Ryan Horseman, to start us off.
Taking the filter down here.
I think you'll probably have to get here for my.
Well, I'll just talk louder. So our last meeting of the year. Obviously, we have the field trip to see the future restoration area. You have to put your goggles on to see the vision of the future. Go look at that. But the county will tell you about all the grand plans that they've got for that. We're going to start off with Brian Flynn from ESA, my coworker. I won't tell you about him because it's nothing good. But no, he's our lead engineer in the Southeast. We're going to be talking about our Treasure Island Living Shoreline Seawall Enhancement Project that was funded by, who all funded it? Keeper, state did originally grant as well. So it's got a lot of funding partners. Part of the reason he's got to present it today, but it's also a really cool project. So Ryan, if you want to take off then.
Just on the tab up there that says one. I got you. Go back to the screen. Beginning. So good to go.
All right. Thank you very much. So I just want to talk a little bit today about the Treasure Island Living Shoreline and Seawall Enhancement Project. This project's been a long time in the works, and we're still working on it. Actually, we're about to, go ahead and get done with the boardwalk and the planting portion of it, hopefully this month, and be able to round out the year. But just wanted to give you a little project overview. This is the Treasure Bay Golf and Tennis Club for the city of Treasure Island, and the seawall basically encapsulates this entire peninsula. They do share this with a development here on the south side. They have a lot of tennis and pickleball courts and their community center here. And then this was a small 9-hole municipal golf course with foot golf and some other things at one time. As we went through the design, we tried to maintain that for them. But they've decided at this point not to continue to support the golf course anymore after this part. So if they decide to do that again in the future, they could be more than happy to. But so you can see here, this is kind of the project purpose. The seawall that was there was installed in the 50s, and basically that seawall was starting to fail. Cardno had come in and done a seawall assessment for the entire city. They had a lot of seawalled shoreline, and all of it was constructed about the same time. So all of it was in about the same state. And so they had approached us to come in and design a living shoreline in this area instead of coming back in and replacing it with a seawalled option. So our project goals were removal of that aging, failing seawall infrastructure. It was basically providing just a little bit of minimal habitat. They also took a lot of the bridge debris just north of the project. And when they rehabilitated that bridge, they took it and put it immediately in front of the wall because they knew the wall was having trouble being able to sustain itself long term, and thought this was a great way to not have to dispose of that bridge debris and also support our wall. And it worked well for a little while, and you'll see that there were some things that recruited in there, and it did provide some habitat, but it was very limited in its extent. So we wanted to add a living shoreline where we could, And then the big part was no impact to the existing resources. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute when we go into the data collection part of the project. We found that there was a lot of resources, which is a good thing. But when you're trying to put a living shoreline out there and you're stuck between a golf course and seagrasses and corals, it becomes a bit of a challenge. Also wanted to improve the water quality and habitat in the golf course ponds. They're used a lot by migratory birds, but they actually had a case of avian botulism that had a big bird die off in there. And so basically, process just really was not, those ponds were not flowing, they weren't connected, created a lot of stagnant water and low water conditions, and then a lot of runoff as well. And then, of course, improving public access. Originally, the thought was to try to incorporate it to where it could be a golf course during the day, and then morning and evening, it would be, a walking trail, a health trail, way for folks to be able to get out there and use that that may not have been golfers. So, talking a little bit about the data collection. First and foremost, as part of our coastal conditions analysis, we go right to looking at, winds and waves and collecting data from the two Albert Whitted and Clearwater airports, and then also the NOAA facility at Clearwater and NOAA in Tampa Bay I think it's at Demon's Landing. But none of these are immediately close to our project location. So we had to take a little bit of poetic license and use each of them in a little bit different aspect, because these three are located on the bay, has a much different wind field than Clearwater out here on the coast. It's just a little bit more like what we had, the conditions we had here at our project site. Obviously Clearwater's quite a distance away from this site as well. So we had a little trouble, as you can see, with the continuity of our wind data over these different at these different sites. But basically, we were able to stitch together a pretty good wind record dating all the way back to 1975. And then also did the same thing with the NOAA tide gauges. So it was these are the airports, and then this one was the NOAA gauges. We take that data and we end up running an extreme value analysis on it to see how those points lay out across a curve, and then select the best fit curve to be able to then extrapolate out and look at our return period for wind speeds, and be able to make a determination on what the design wind should be for the project site, and then turning that into a 2-minute averaged wind speed, looking at selecting, we had a 10-year wind of 57 miles per hour and then a 25-year of 71 miles per hour. This project was initiated back in 2020, so this is before all the recent storms that we've had. And so that probably would have increased this a little bit more, but this is the reason why we do this, right? Because we may have had Irma, right? That was probably Irma and Hermine, I think, were the two that maybe were in that 2016, 2017 timeframe that would have been included in that record. But the Tampa Bay area had been pretty lucky up until that point. So talking a little bit more about why we got that wind and what we did with it. We look at using that along with mean high water levels, and then adding the 10-year storm surge to the 25-year storm surge for those areas. And then plugged all of this information into, this is a proprietary 1D wave model that we've come up with at ESA we call Wave 98 because it ran on Windows 98. We've now adapted it into MATLAB, but it does a couple things different but it's basically a lot like the ACES software that you can buy off the shelf for, 1D wave modeling. So given those wins for those 10-year return period and the 25-year return period, like I said, we look at those water levels, simulated water levels of mean high water and storm surge. We something interesting that, I mean, the average elevation of the golf course itself is probably at 3.5 or 4 foot, somewhere in that location. So even the 10-year storm surge was going to be up over top of what we were looking at. And then last year, I think the water level was recorded at like 10.5 during Helene. So that one was definitely well above the 25-year return period. What Wave 98 does is translates that into a significant wave height for us in a period, and then we apply that to generate basically what is the unit weight of the material that we need to be able to hold. And where this comes into play is this something that we're going to be able to use something small like an oyster bag or a small precast concrete structure? Or are we going to have to place larger riprap, a larger precast structure in order to be able to basically protect that shoreline? So as we go into the design and permitting, we basically decided at that point that we weren't going to use limestone riprap. We just needed to size it. This is the equation, the Hudson equation that we used to apply it, and the parameters that we came up with. And so basically using those design wave heights, we come out with a median weight, and a median stone diameter. And again, this is what we use to then be able to go and spec out for those shorelines. And here's what we found when we were doing the shoreline analysis. We found some sea whips, also some stony corals and some soft corals, and then a lot of thalassia as well. So those were good signs that the water quality was right in that area. And if we created the habitat, then we were going to be able to recruit more of this, right? But as we went into permitting, it was also a big challenge because of the aquatic preserve, because of the restrictions of being able to actually do work in the water. So our design basically started to show up a little bit more like this. We could do a full living shoreline in this first section because there was limited resources in that location. We had a lot of thalassia here in this corner where it shallowed up to in the marina, and then basically anywhere that bridge debris was placed all the way along the outside of that seawall, that's where the corals had attached. Anything below mean high water, probably about a foot below mean high water, actually. So we worked on doing a lot of grading back from the existing. The only place that we really were able to push out into the bay a little bit was back here in the back portion of this bay. And this line that you see here, this dark line, that was actually the shoreline in 1921. And we had to go all the way back to find historical aerials in order to be able to prove that to state lands, because in order to be able to do any work out in here, we had to get a sovereign submerged lands easement. And they would allow us to place material here where the shoreline used to be. And this was all excavated out to create this basin, this marina basin, and then probably ended up backfilling a lot of this area as well. But the rest of it, we were restricted to being within 10 feet of the mean high water line, which is the seawall. And in some places even closer to that because we had to observe a buffer from any coral or seagrass that was out there. The goal of the design was to create this walking path all the way along that also would serve as our consistent +5 elevation. So in with this grading, one of the things that Treasure Island has is a no net fill. ordinance. So no material was going to be able to leave the site, and no material other than the shoreline protection was going to be able to come into the site. So the riprap was technically fill, but it was shoreline protection. So that's the way that we were able to work around the placement of that riprap in the on the site. We did recontour the edges of each one of the ponds. We created a connection, which I'll show you. It has a small little V-notch weir in front of the concrete drop structures in order to be able to keep water. When we were originally on the project, there's a culvert here. It was partially collapsed, and water is just free flowing back and forth to the bay, basically from the southern pond. The northern pond, somehow the pipe had been picked up, and the end of the culvert pulled about 3 foot up into the air. So there was no connection between these two ponds, and that's why this is the north pond is where the avian botulism ended, in the migratory birds ended up passing away. So this area is probably the highest. This is one of the tee boxes on the golf course. This area is probably about +8. So the reason why we took the path down, number one, this is the boardwalk section. We took it down so that we could have ADA access to that boardwalk. And then number two, the elevation contours in this area are higher than the +5, so we could maintain that 5 foot across the entire project area. And before we did that, there was low spots, and during the hurricanes, we could see exactly where those low spots were, and primarily running across this way and across this direction. And it's pretty amazing to see how Mother Nature worked in that way, because knowing that this was the old 1921 shoreline, it was really trying to basically recreate that 1921 shoreline. Here's basically the cross section for the living shoreline. Here's the seawall. We graded down behind where we cut the cap off, and then, like I said, we cut fill, balanced the cut fill across the project site. So in some of those areas where we were maybe taking a little bit more fill, that came into play here as placement underneath the bedding stone. And then for this section of the project, we did not use any geotextile material. It is purely just a gradation change as we go through the stone, to show that we could do it without having to place geotextile fabric in the water. In other locations, as we got around to the seawall enhancement portion, where we cut the wall down, but we weren't able to place anything in front of the wall. In those locations, we did have to put some geotextile fabric in order to be able to hold back any of the fine material from migrating into the water body. But all of that was placed above mean high water. So we were trying to keep that out of the water as much as possible. And then also, we sized the precast concrete reef units. They were sourced from Reef Innovations. The maximum weight was about 1,300 pounds. We had a minimum weight of about 500 pounds, but we ended up placing the larger ones out offshore simply because we wanted that relief. We wanted a taller profile because they were placed in about 8 feet of water. This is one of the renderings that we did to be able to present to the public meetings that we held with the city. And this is the kayak launch location. The configuration looks a little different. It went through a couple different iterations of what the city wanted, but it is an ADA kayak launch here, and I think I have another picture of it actually in place. And then the Oyster Dome locations actually moved a little bit here, because once we found how much seagrass was in this location, we moved them up to the northern portion of the project area. Some of our design and permitting challenges were avoiding the resources. Like I mentioned, the submerged lands lease. We actually, really had a lot of good discussions with state lands, and at first, it really seemed like a stumbling block, but then they came back with a lot of good ideas to help us make the project a reality, so at the end of the day, it was really a positive. We'd been working to try to preserve the golf course. When we went out to bid, the costs were prohibitive for the city to be able to fund that, because that was the part they were funding all on their own. The rest of it had shared funding. So the golf course is now out for now. But we did route that sidewalk around the outside to where, and try to make it so that folks can use both, the facility for golf and for walking and just leisure at other times as well. So now we get into the good part with construction. This is the south pond now. Now that this has been graded back and planted, and all the ducks seem to be really happy about it. They've installed a fountain that also helps to circulate that water as well. I think this one was actually at Roseate as well, but a lot of Florida mallards. There is a valve, and this is the valve box that now separates that south pond from the bay. So they can keep the water in there and keep that exchange from happening, so that it's really just release upon the point where we've had way too much rain. They can't contain it anymore. And that helps them to be able to keep that water level up to where it's benefiting, waterfowl and, vegetation in there as well. The littoral shells were set about a half a foot between each other, two to 2.5 foot. And we wanted that vegetation to be inundated most of the time. If they do enter a time where we have a lot of drought, like we've had the last couple of months, we're going to actually probably get a chance to test they tapped into an old well, and they can actually set it to a float switch, so that once it starts to get to about a foot and a half below that littoral shelf, that pump will kick on and start to fill us back up again. And so we can start to kind of circulate that water and make sure we don't have that stagnant effect long term. This is the V-notch weir with the skimmer board on front of it, and this is our concrete drop structure. And we have one of these on each one. What this V-notch allows us to do is just bleed this down over time. So as that water starts to stage up in there, we can slowly bleed it down and have it, instead of just flushing all that out at one time. So we did have another issue. I talked a little bit about the seawall analysis that was done. This section of the wall, once the cap was cut, unfortunately, there was a lot of rain that weekend, and we had that portion of the wall rotate out. And so this was right after 4th of July. And so we went into a little bit of a, investigative mode to see what was going on there. And really, the condition of the wall just was not as good as what we had originally thought based on the analysis. So we went back and modified the permit to take that. Now that we knew that there was not going to be a golf course and we could pull the shoreline back further, we modified it to cut that seawall at the mud line. It was about a 400-foot section that we ended up taking. So it wasn't just this like 20-foot section. We took all the way from station 800 all the way around the north end to 1200 and connected it up on the other end, and really made it a little bit more of a true living shoreline in that sense, instead of just a seawall enhancement that's going to be perched, because we didn't want to have issues with it long term. Again, it wasn't just that section. There was other sections as well that, once the cap had been removed, it really exposed the fact that that seawall condition was in pretty bad shape. This is, again, looking at that south pond just from a different level. You can see here, this is that higher section that I was talking about for that tee box. It's higher in elevation. And the boardwalk, they're finishing the new cap that goes underneath the boardwalk for the seawall. And those tiebacks that were remade to the Deadman. So they're finishing that part. They should be should be starting the boardwalk this week, and then that will pretty much finish out this section of the work. There's a little more sidewalk to do. This is a picture of the ADA compliant kayak launch. You'll note that it had to you had to take a little chunk off of it. The other pictures we had an H, and now we've got a little bit different. But we had to stay 25 feet away from the property line, and the property line runs right out here for the condo association. So therefore, we lost a corner of our kayak launch. So, like I said, some really construction challenges were that seawall condition, changing condition, and then, like I said, instead of just trying to do 20 foot here, 20 foot there, we just said we're going back for modification, and that took us from about January, or sorry, January, July, 4th of July weekend. We got our modification the first week of October. So all said and done, pretty good turnaround. There's a lot of people to thank, and that were part of this project, and and part of making it a success. And so just wanted to make sure I listed them all here. So especially Ryan, because he gets to hear me vent about it all the time. Now, it was a really good project. It was a long time coming, 5 years to get it done. But I think at the end of the day, it's a better project overall, and it's going to last them for a long time. And so, any questions? I'll be happy to answer them. Nope. Go easy on me. I'm sure Ryan has at least one question. Or Damon. Damon touched this project too.
There's seagrass there.
I might be able to get this to play. I stuck it in here just to.
Dance on there?
No dancing.
Yeah.
This is some of the drone photography. So this was before, all nice, lush and green, irrigated. This is the portion now that's living shoreline. Here's where our seagrass was located. There's our corals. It's still there. It's actually it's doing really good. Before we were like, is there really seagrass? But yes, there is. It's flourishing. Those are just the renderings. This is before. This was the transition, kind of between the seawall to remain and then the living shoreline portion. And you can see in this picture, there's our oyster domes offshore, and they got a lot of bait on them. I did, when we had the wall issue, I did dive in. I was more focused on what seagrasses were associated close to the wall and what was going on with the wall, but there was a lot of fish on there. So I would be interested to see if someone does a little bit more monitoring, formal monitoring long term. But this is them being lowered into their final resting place. That's the living shoreline before the sidewalk was placed there. This all will get planted. Basically, the sidewalks up here, this will all get planted all the way down. They've not planted any of it yet. This is the north end of the project. There was a lot of other, this used to be a landfill too. So there's a lot of trash and debris. And then it was also, after the storm, it was one of their sites for debris. So there's a lot of history out there. We did leave this one section around this big sea grate because there was multiple green heron nests in there. And we decided that the wall in this location, which originally was not supposed to be good, was actually some of the best in the project area. So we left it for now. And if the city wants to come back and address that later on, they can, but really wanted to keep in order to be able to do this, we would have had to really either do this by water or come back in here and really trim up this. And we didn't want to do that since there were so many nests in that location.
Hey
This
Brian, this
was
is Brandon Johnson. Can you hear
yeah.
me?
Hey, Brandon.
Hey, thanks for the presentation. I am in this area a lot, so it's been great to see some of this progress go on. Couple of questions. I know that the marina, obviously, but even the intercoastal right there is a no wake zone. But did you look at any effects? I saw with the coastal analysis, you were looking at wind fetch and essentially wind driven waves. Did you guys consider any of the wakes, or uh, because it was already no wake zone, it's essentially as good as it's going to get through there as far as boating goes? How did you address the wake component?
So the weight component, we still looked at it as like there was probably going to be, 2 to 3 foot wake in there because there's folks who just don't obey the zone. So, but actually on that northern tip here, there was quite a bit of fetch coming through underneath the bridge. And actually the wind effects and the boat wakes were about the same. So we saw about a 2.5 foot uh, wave as being our design wave. So I meant to mention that a little bit further back, but yes, we had a pretty good correlation. A lot of times we don't see that. In other projects, we've actually gone out and measured the boat wakes and everything as well. But on this one, we knew that intercoastal waterway was there, and even though the it wasn't a no wake zone, there's still the opportunity that somebody's not going to, adhere to it. So.
Oh yeah, I can confirm that happens. Um, awesome. And then you may have covered this, I might have just missed it, but were there any relocation efforts with the corals, either the stony corals or the gorgonians? You said there were a lot of them were on the bridge piling or the old bridge structure. How was that handled in permitting, and was it just simple avoiding and avoiding
Yeah, so
mineralization?
we did avoid it. We did not do any transplant of them, and so where you see this riprap ending here, that's basically where the wall was located. So we did not place any. We couldn't place anything out past being high water onto the existing uh, riprap or the existing bridge debris. So there was nothing placed there that was going to disturb them.
And no issues with the turbidity curtain or anything in locating that between that structure or anything?
So we had a little bit of a Goldilocks zone between the toe of uh, the toe of the bridge structure because of wave action and where the seagrass was located. So we were able to stake that turbidity curtain down through in that gap and basically be able to still contain any of that turbidity. So
Great. Appreciate it. Great project. Thanks for the presentation.
yep. Thanks, Brandon. So the one other thing I was going to tell you, this is kind of straight up from that kayak launch, and the other thing that it does is it provides a great view, down the shoreline of a living shoreline as well. So it was twofold, kind of an observation area and a kayak launch. Charlie.
Do you expect any mangrove improvement?
Yes.
So,
Yes. Yeah, so we did not plant any mangroves. The plantings are all mostly grasses, but it's especially this portion. This was the first portion that was completed. There's already mangrove seedlings growing in there. So yeah. Anything else? All right. Thank you very much.
Ryan. All right, I'm gonna switch over to my presentation and give you all an update on habitat restoration that's happened in the last year. And then we have an activity for you afterwards. So I hope everybody brought their thinking caps. Okay, so each year at the end of the year, we try and give you an update on habitat restoration project progress throughout the watershed based on a couple of different data streams. And so I'll go ahead and get into that right now. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the Habitat Master Plan targets and goals. This is going to be a repeat for most of the people in the room, but just to kind of set the stage for what we'll be talking about. And then I'll talk about the restoration that's been reported in the last fiscal year to us. And then also the last 2 years, we've been doing a habitat report card. This time it's a draft, and you guys are going to actually contribute to some of the priority habitats for us in that report card. So after I speak, if you haven't picked up some of the handouts along the side there, go ahead and grab them. And everything I'll be talking about will be linked in the presentation for those of you online. So let's get started. In the Habitat Master Plan, we talk about maximizing the potential for restoration. So these are areas that we can actually restore instead of looking at historical records. So this is basically what is the possibility. And so we look at a couple of data sources to look at this. First, it's the mapping sources from the Water Management District, the subtidal habitats, and then also land use land cover for the intertidal and supertidal habitats. And we've actually got updated information for that we're able to put into the habitat report card this year. And then the information that you all report to us each year is our EPA reporting. So that's annual reporting. We've been doing it since 2006, and it's voluntary reported. So the more information we get from you, the better the information is. And in those, we have project types, descriptions, total acres and miles that are restored. So each time that we look at the mapping progress, our table is updated. So we had, the extents that were mapped when the Habitat Master Plan was started, but these habitats are updated as that changes. And it's also, we also change the acreage to go for those 2030 targets where we want to be in 2030 and 2050 goals, which is where we want to be in 2050. So these change over time. This is a little bit of a busy table, so I'll just zoom in on one habitat for an example. And this is oyster restoration. So originally, when the Habitat Master Plan started, that was 2018, there was about 171 acres. Currently, we have 217, and that's based on the new 2024 subtitle mapping plus FWC oyster beds of Florida. If you remember last year, we had actually met the goal based on some of that, but now we're at about 4 acres to go for our 2030 target. And then if you look out to 2050, well, that's a lot of acreage to go, 471 acres. So that's how each one of the habitats is laid out. So this is our new habitat report card based on land use land cover and the subtitle mapping. There are all new numbers for 2024 for subtitle, and then new numbers for 2023 for the intertidal and supertidal. So if you look here in the green, that means that the target that we have set for 2030 was met. And if the arrow is going up, that means that it's trending towards being met all the way to 2030. So if you see a green arrow pointing up, we're doing well. If the target hasn't been met, then it'll be red. And if it's trending downwards and it looks like we're not going to meet it by 2030, then you'll have that arrow pointing downwards. So there's a few habitats in which that's the case. And if you look in comparison from the 2022 numbers and the 2020 numbers, we've got a lot more arrows that are red or pointing downwards. So, those are things that we need to consider when we're coordinating habitat restoration throughout the watershed. So as far as let's see if I can hide this. Nope, that didn't work. Okay. Never mind. Okay, I'm not going to mess with it. Ah, there it is. Okay, so now these are the projects that have been reported to us. So the information we report to EPA started in 2006, but we do have information ahead of that. So these are all the projects that we have on record from 1971. So next year, I think we'll probably hit 1,000 projects and 200,000 acres. So look out for that. But right now, we have 974 habitat projects reported, and we split that up between actual restoration, whether it's maintenance like prescribed burns, things like that, and then protection, which is like land acquisition. And you can actually look at this over time based on the habitat type. And this is from when we started reporting to EPA. So we've got to separate that out by habitat type. You can see we've got increasing number of projects over time, which is good. A lot of those projects are happening in uplands. We've got some increases in seagrass projects and oyster projects. And we had quite a few living shoreline projects this year as well. So as far as what was reported last year, we had 66 habitat projects reported, not 67, we've got about 278 acres restored, 7 miles. The majority of those are in uplands and coastal uplands. So 28 projects in uplands, 12 in coastal uplands, and then followed by mangrove projects and living shorelines, 6 projects each. And you can see the breakdown here of, either the total acres or the total miles. We also zoomed in on the last 3 years just to show, what we've been seeing reported over the last 3 years. Been between 60 and 80 projects over the last 3 years. Again, most of those are uplands, and you see, changes depending on when projects are ending. So this is not necessarily all the restoration that's happening in the watershed, but just when it was finished during that fiscal year and can be reported. So I just wanted to highlight several of the contributing partners. Thank you so much for contributing your restoration data. We wouldn't be able to make these pretty graphics and do the work that we do without the information that you provide to us. And this isn't all of the partners. These are some of the main implementers, but obviously there's a lot of cooperators in every single one of these restoration projects. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and highlight a couple of projects from this year. And one of the things that we did a lot of this year was in the maintenance category. So the reporting for 2025 included from October through September. So we did a lot of debris removal projects in association with the hurricanes. TBP in itself sponsored 5 hurricane-specific events, and through those events, we took out over 7,000 pounds of debris and covered 5 acres from, whether it's vegetation removal or, just regular debris removal. We also had a lot of submissions from Keep Pinellas Beautiful and Keep Manatee Beautiful on debris removal. So a lot of these projects don't end up in our restoration totals because they're maintenance, but a lot of work was done in this area over the last year. So I just wanted to highlight that a little bit of some of the great work that's being done. And then one of the major restorations that finished up last year was Wheaton Island tidal restoration. So they did a lot of work out there in removing mosquito ditches and spoil mounds and filling. Over 42 acres was restored. So that was reported this year. So that was a really great project to see come to fruition. And, maybe we can go tour that next December. And then, of course, Brian just reported on the Treasure Island living shoreline. That was reported this year, adding several linear feet to our totals. And then I just wanted to briefly touch on a project that was reported last year, and that was the Emerson Point expansion, which was an acquisition project by Manatee County that you'll all be seeing later today if you stick around for the field trip. So those are just some examples of what we're getting in our database, and we really appreciate y'all sending photos. A lot of people sent shape files this year as well, so that's really good information for us. So usually, at this point, we take the information from the mapping, we take the information from the habitat that's been restored in the last several years, and we make some recommendations for priority habitats for the upcoming year. So we're going to do that a little differently this year, and we're going to get some input from you, basically because there's not an easy 3 priority habitats. There's a lot that has changed based on the different mapping information. So in August, we talked about a workflow to go through this and make some decisions on, what we would consider a priority habitat for the next year. So if you picked up the logic workflow that was over there, that's what I'm talking about. But I'm going to work my way through it, and then we'll fill out a worksheet at the end to try and make some decisions. Okay, so this was the timeline that I gave you back in August, where we presented this draft process, and we got a lot of feedback. We had a Mentimeter that went out where, there's a lot of habitats that, well, there's at least 5 habitats that we can't actually measure based on land use land cover. So for example, living shorelines, artificial reefs, hard bottom, those are things that we can't measure on those, predicted time steps for the mapping cycle. So we got some information from you on how we should do that. The draft habitat report card was over there, and it's also linked online, so you have it. And it's all filled out with the current information that I just went through in the presentation, except for those 3 priority habitats. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So in December, that's where we're at. We're going to walk through this decision process, and then we'll try and decide on 3 priority habitats amongst all of us, and we'll make some recommendations to the technical advisory committee, and then finalize the habitat report card at that time. Okay, so here's the draft habitat report card. Like I said, it looks similar to the last 2 years, except for this one box here, which says to be determined. So we're going to go ahead and walk through some of these steps. Okay, so these were the different assessment steps that we thought would be a good way to not only use your expert knowledge, but also use some of the data that we're collecting to make some informed decisions on how to prioritize habitat restoration. So we've got a couple of different assessment steps and actions. And if you want the whole document, it's linked there. I just printed out the flow chart for you guys here. So we'll start with the first step. So the first step we've actually already talked about. So this is basically looking at the habitat types that meet the 2030 targets based on mapping. So the first step would be, okay, have each individual habitat types met the 2030 targets for the last 2 mapping cycles. So if you look at this habitat report card, you can see that there are a few that have met it. So here, tidal flats, they're in the green and they're looking up. Salt barrens, and also non-forested freshwater wetlands. So those are the ones that we'd say, okay, well, we maybe don't need to prioritize these right now because they're doing fine. So again, those are the 3 that fall out on this first step. But if you look at it, there's way more than 3 habitats to look at there. So we'll have to go to the next step. And the next step, we talked about using the habitat restoration that's been reported by you all to see kind of the pace of restoration in those different habitat types. So here we can look at, okay, well, how much is being done in wetlands versus oysters versus mangroves, and kind of calculate that out. And the good thing about this one is we'll be able to actually look at trends for artificial reefs, living shorelines, hard bottom, and tidal tributaries, which we can't really get from mapping. So based on this, what we did is we took the most recent mapping data for each habitat. So for subtitle, that would be 2024. For the terrestrial, that would be 2023. But for some of these that are starred, that would be all the way back to 2017, where the Habitat Master Plan was actually put together. And then we added on the amount of restoration, cumulative restoration that's happened since that time, to add on the acreage or miles. So then we could say, okay, well, if we added that on, did it meet the 2030 targets? That would be the first step. And then the next thing we did is we took the average restoration that happened in all those habitat types over the last 5 years. So from 2020 to now, and extended that out to 2030 to see if that pace of restoration would actually meet the target by 2030. So that would be like the arrow pointing up. So what we found from doing that exercise is that hard bottom, artificial reefs, and mangroves, both met the target and looked like they were trending upwards, based on restoration. So that adds a few more habitats in there that are doing well. And if you know anything about the Habitat Master Plan, hard bottom, artificial reefs, and mangroves are those that don't have a specific increase in target. That was just a hold the line. So that makes sense. So we're not losing, and we're keeping up with the pace by restoration. But that still leaves us 8 habitat types to think about as far as prioritizing for restoration. So we've done 2 different calculations based on 2 different data sets, but now it comes down to you all. And this next action is to look at, okay, well, what's happening in a particular base segment or a particular county or city? What are your priorities? What are you looking to fund in the next year? Are there specific projects that are targeted towards different habitats? So this is where the worksheet comes in. And the worksheet has the information that I just laid out on the mapping. So if it's in the green, that means it's met the targets. If it's in the red, it hasn't. Same thing for the habitat restoration. So you can kind of go through this process. Another thing we wanted you all to put into consideration when you're thinking about this is the amount of restoration to go that's put out in the habitat restoration plan. So for example, all of these habitats that have a number here are ones that we do need to do restoration in. But if you look at, say, native uplands, that's over 3,000 acres versus, coastal uplands, which is only, 142 acres. So you can take that into consideration as far as what we need to prioritize. The other thing to think about is whether it's located in this reservation space, which is what was defined in the Habitat Master Plan as within the 5-foot contour of the shoreline. So that's where sea level rise is really going to have an impact. So we highlighted those intertidal areas as ones that might be in more danger of being lost over the next several years. So what we would like you to do with this worksheet is to go through and look at first opportunity areas. Where are things located in your watershed or in your area where you do restoration, where you can actually do restoration, what type of habitats those would be. And actually, I don't have the worksheet up, but as you're going through and looking at those opportunity areas, there's a QR code, 2 of them down here, that go to some maps that you can look at. So the first QR code is the opportunity areas within the entire watershed. And then the second QR code is restoration potential based on habitat type. So you can zoom in on your area of interest and kind of get an idea of like, okay, well, we do have some opportunities there. So for these first 3 columns, it's more of kind of a yes or no. Like, do we have opportunity in each one of these habitats? Is it a local priority? Like, is it in a plan that you have, within a county or a city that you're definitely going to be looking at those habitats? And do you have funding available? So those first 3 columns would be basically a yes, no. And then the final column would be projects that are planned for the upcoming fiscal year. So the idea behind this would be like, okay, well, we know this partner, and this partner are prioritizing habitat restoration in a particular habitat, and we can check in with you next year to see if that happened and how that affects what we're seeing in the watershed. So take a 5 to 10 minutes, think about this worksheet, discuss, and then we can, circle back and talk about some of the habitats that we think we should prioritize. But before that, does anybody have any questions?
So these projects we're not aware of at this time, and anything that we've not already reported.
Yeah, so these would be ones that, maybe you're planning on implementing in the next year, or you can see on the horizon, things that we don't know about.
Okay, so beginning of design or feasibility.
Yeah.
So the first 3 empty columns, opportunity areas, local priority, funding available, that's basically a yes, no
Yeah.
for each
Mm-hmm.
habitat type.
Yep.
And then the last one is got something right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is our attempt at reconciling divergent pieces of information to inform what the priorities are, as Carrie explained. So, we track targets and goals based on the land use cover maps, but what y'all report to us based on the restoration projects, those 2 things don't necessarily line up in terms of the information that they're telling us. So the first 5 columns, actually the first 6 columns, combine all that information. So it's trying to weight those things differently to inform this decision. So
For the most part, a lot of these match up, right?
Yeah.
So, if you look at the mapping versus habitat restoration implementing, it matches up. But there are some cases like, for example, if you look at tidal tributaries, we don't really have information on that from mapping. But if we take the information from habitat restoration, it looks like, okay, well, it's not met now, but based on the amount of restoration on average that's happened over the last 5 years, it looks like we might actually meet that goal if those transform into, things that show up on the mapping. So, obviously the mapping is one that we know, like the quality assurance on, we know that it's repeatable. So this is going to be like the first line of making that choice. But we do have all this information from you that we would like to take and use in a good way, basically. All right. Are there any questions online? You can find all the information linked in the presentation as well. Feel free to talk amongst yourselves. I'll go ahead and mute us for a bit and
So this opportunities map is something that's a product from our habitat master plan. We update this every time we get an updated land cover or subtitle layer from the water management district. And through basically a series of intersections of different spatial layers, we can categorize the land in our watershed into one of 6 categories that basically defines a couple things. Is it native land? That's one. Is it restorable land, which is basically like land use that could be restored to native habitat, like fallow farm fields, or I don't know, if, like retired golf courses are under that category, things like that. So is it native or restorable? Is it under existing conservation status? So is it currently protected? Or is it proposed to be protected? Those are the other 2 categories. And that comes from the Florida Natural Areas Inventory. And then also there's this reservation category that's reservation native or reservation restorable. That's everything that's within the 5-foot contour here that are areas that we're going to be given a higher, slightly higher priority based on how we think sea level rise is going to impact them. So wherever your jurisdiction is, you would look on this map and see where any of these 6 areas might be. If something is basically existing conservation native, that's pretty good. Keep it in that category. But I think mostly you want to be looking for these restorable areas, areas that could be restored to a native habitat, whether that's existing under protection, proposed to be protected, or in this reservation space. And if you go to the restoration potential map, this then gives you an idea of what type of habitat it could be restored to, given its status within these other categories. So if you identify an area and say, well, this has potential, then you could see, well, based on the soils or the elevation or whether it's close to the 5-foot contour, these are potential categories that it could be restored to. And the methods for this, it's all in the habitat master plan, but this is where you would look if you want to know what kind of habitat it could be restored to. So coastal uplands, freshwater wetlands, native uplands, tidal wetlands, just gives you a rough overview of what you could do. And we realize these are very broad products that are at a very broad spatial scale. It doesn't, it's a planning prioritization tool that should give you a sense of where to look. And then, you would obviously do some site level visits or things like that to get a more in-depth assessment of what is actually there on the landscape. So I don't know if anybody's using these tools. We hope you are. That's why they're being created. But this was the intent behind them, and hopefully that's a little bit more clear as to what they're telling you. Crystal clear?
All right, everybody. Let them, yeah. Okay, so we've had some time to think about this. First, let's get like a temperature check in the room. Was this process understandable, clear as mud, or no, let's never do this again with like a thumbs up, this or down?
I'll do a tiny bit of brutal honesty.
Please.
So, as someone who's been a practitioner, both with small scale for not all of them, like this stuff is always like super opportunist to get these chances to do that. And maybe this is different with other agencies or anything else, but we never sat down and looked for this map or anything like this because it was like, there's a thing, let's go do it. So I think the intent is there, but I think there might be some disconnect between usability and our practitioners and everyone, this stuff, because most of this is like, it's mapped out and it's there and that's cool, but it's painfully obvious to anybody who like works in it. And they're like, well, we can't build that there because there's houses. We didn't need the map to tell us that sort of stuff.
Right.
And maybe because they're like way too far along processing. So I feel like there would be like maybe more value in putting priority on what is more feasible and actually more sustainable. Because there's something like that. There's beautiful things like native upland restoration and these sorts of things, which always sounds great. But if there's not an entity there to like manage that thing in that, then it's like there's millions of dollars that all these agencies have spent around this area, like coastal upland restoration, these sorts of things that is $10,000 different than where it was when we started, but we put millions of dollars into it. So it's
No, that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up because Ryan and I actually talked about this yesterday. Whereas like there's an opportunity, but is it actually feasible? And we even thought about putting in an extra column for that to just be like, hey, is that even feasible within those types of habitats? So if that's something that would be useful, we can add something like that. Okay, great. So go ahead and just add a column to the end of your worksheet and put feasibility, basically. Like, you know, is this that it's a habitat that you're interested in restoring, but can you do it?
This is what I think about this.
Mhm.
Be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. Any other kind of general comments that would make this more useful?
When looking at the second map, it looks like areas that we've already had restored, particularly down in Terracea, are identified for opportunity. So I don't know if that's something on our end that maybe we did not provide numbers.
So this map is based on the land use land cover. So if it was just restored, it may not be showing up that way yet.
If it has not been reclassified by FAA and our restoration may not have matured to the point where it would be reclassified, or the success of our restoration may not have tripped the threshold to say it was a successful restoration, because I'll say, old beat up coastal agricultural lands are incredibly difficult. I will say that putting before our board a second restoration project on the same footprint is not a position that anyone be in.
Yep.
And to Damon's point, I would say that not all agencies have same amount of effort in maintenance post construction. And we're running into some serious issues on that front. But I'm just seeing a lot of overlap of former projects that are still on this land. And when you're asking, is there a funding opportunity? That's a big ask if we've already invested in it. a property and it's not meeting, or it just hasn't been reclassified. That's finished.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. And that gets to kind of the stepwise process of looking at the mapping first and then, what's been restored, because that may not actually show up yet, but it's another indicator that we can use. The effort's been going towards that. But as far as, when you're filling out this worksheet about opportunity areas, local priorities, funding and things like that, that's where information like that will be useful. So, if you have projects planned in certain areas, then, we know that those are areas that you're looking at. So this is meant to be as a guide,
Yeah, and I think these maps, last time they were updated was middle of the year, so it's been a couple months. But I know that FNA layers, they do get updated quite frequently. But I don't have a good sense of how well that propagates from what you're doing from what you're report on. I will say when I did update this, there were some areas near our office that in the past had been like the restoration potential area. No longer there because there was like a power station that was put there. So I have noticed changes from the original one that was based off like 2017 when I used to that. But if there's like little areas that you're aware of, let us know so that we can rectify that and we see where in this information pipeline things may or may not be listed correctly.
Is that land use map changes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah,
probably in a couple hours.
Yeah.
But what we can do is we can, get you our restoration geodatabase overlay and say, okay, something's already happened.
Yeah.
There, and it could just be a reclassification that has yet to occur.
Yes, and that there was when the Habitat Master Plan was updated in 2020, there was a more concerted effort to try to get those additional data sets in there to supplement the FNA layers. And frankly, we haven't had the time to do something with that for these updates because it would, we have to do this every multiple times a year. But if there's any kind of supplementary data sets that you have, that you could send us that can make these types of maps more accurate, definitely share them with us.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's part of this process is getting that individual data that we all know. Yeah, because if you look at the map, Irish Shoals Preserve that was restored, but it still shows Hollow Beach is a large area, and mangrove shows up as a historical and authority mangroves and things like that. So there's a lot of places like that. And if you think about like the tributary stuff we did for the old mine land, that doesn't show up anywhere as restored really. So there's better detail on that. So it's really if everyone in their area they know can identify those opportunities. Most of them aren't. They're either going to show up here or not, but they may not even be correct if they do show up. So it's identifying them and being able to say, hey, this should be a priority because we've got these 4 sites in Yancey County or something that don't show up anywhere, but we know we can restore these. We want to chase funding for it.
yeah. And that's why we wanted to do this activity is for information just like that we're not going to know, and that you all could provide to us to make better informed decisions instead of us saying, oh, well, it looks like we should restore X, Y, and Z. It's better to get all that information together and, make a decision together.
Want to see.
Any other general comments? Yeah, thanks for those already. And I think, if anybody wants to volunteer to talk about their worksheet, that would be great. I saw you, Whitney. You said you wanted to explain it to me.
Saying that, you're well aware of just about everything that's in our plans. We do have a district initiative, kind of database that we keep of our wish list. We're not, until they get vetting and funding, bringing them up at this point without, being supported internally.
Yeah.
Is a difficult thing to do. there's a number of projects that I think are viable and they have support. And obviously, we're willing to listen to the community, can't be cooperative budget. But I think you're well aware everything's going, you're funding a lot of it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so so that project list is more for things that are like imminent, not that are on your wish list, So yeah, we do know a lot of those, but in case we don't, here's an opportunity. All right, so based on,
Sorry, Tom had a comment.
oh, sure. Tom, do you want to just go ahead and talk, unmute yourself? Looks like Tom had a suggestion that living shorelines could be a priority, as there's several in the works that we're working on. Seawalls. Okay. All right. If we go back to the presentation and the worksheet. So we'll just kind of go through these one by one. So for hard bottom, artificial reefs and tidal flats, those are basically all in the green. As far as meeting or trending towards meeting the targets. The next one would be seagrasses, which aren't meeting, oyster bars. If you go back to the report card, those were trending upwards and meeting last time around, but not for 2 mapping cycles in a row. Mangroves are meeting right now. They were trending towards not meeting it based on land cover, but based on restoration, it looks like they might. Salt barrens are meeting it. Non-forested are meeting it. So basically what we have is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 habitats that we could potentially prioritize. So, if we're looking at these 7 habitats and thinking about things that we can actually tackle in the next year, that's kind of where we want to be. We did have some conversations internally about seagrasses. As you know, a lot of seagrass restoration is, seagrasses do better when water quality does better. So that could be and we address that in a lot of our other products, like our water quality report card and some of the seagrass mapping that we talk about. So we could potentially, even though that is one that still needs work, that is one that we could put on the back burner as far as prioritization, because that's not necessarily going to be significantly impacted by on the ground seagrass planting. So that's one option that was talked about, but I'd love to hear other folks' opinions on, what you think is realistic as far as prioritizing for the next year. We've got one suggestion for living shorelines from Tom. Any other suggestions from the gallery here? We can also look at the amount that we have to go in each one of these and where we kind of need the most work. Oh, that's cut off.
Is acquisition like tied into these two?
So acquisition is not included on this. We just included, well, at least with the habitat restoration implemented, we just took the restoration data. So, we have it separated out by maintenance, restoration, and protection. That exercise was only done on actual restoration. Yep.
Differentiation between forest and freshwater wetlands.
that are isolated versus riverine?
That's kind of a judgment call based on how it's reported by the partner. If you're talking about this part, if you're talking about mapping, I don't know if you can answer that.
I would imagine there's no distinguishing between them as far as mapping goes. It's just a broad category. The land of the maps. I mean,
That's gonna be a big difference in affecting water flow.
Mhm.
If we can isolate that, right, something's different.
No, that's good information. So like, we have this habitat master plan, but we redo it every 10 years. So all of these can be, kind of incorporated into new targets in the future too. So.
Kind of goes along the lines of the living shoreline that we talked about, and artificial reef really should be hard lock, right?
Mhm.
And we shouldn't be creating artificial reef it's really a novel habitat, not a native habitat. It's either hard bottom or it's a solid rock. Living shoreline's kind of the same way. It's either providing hard bottom habitat, providing oyster habitat, or providing mangrove habitat, or it's a pile of rocks. It may be providing fisheries habitat, but it's still kind of a novel habitat. So those are things we try to evaluate in the next habitat restoration plan. I mean, to me, tidal tributaries is probably something I would list as a priority, because there's multi-system benefits that come from that, and our ability to tackle tidal tributaries is shrinking as development impinges on those floodplains. So, to me, that seems to be one. There is some desire with fish passage, and we don't get that funding, but there's a push for that kind of stuff. So, to me, I think tidal tributaries should be a focus for priority.
Well, the good news for this one, when we did our exercise as far as like the pace of restoration in tidal tributaries based on what's reported. Oh, hold on. Yeah, it looked like we were closer to trending towards getting to that goal based on the restoration that's happening on the ground. So there's also that conversation too. Do we concentrate on realistically attainable goals in the short term, or ones that really have a long way to go? So, there's two different ways of looking at it.
Good point. Risk. And so it's going on.
That kind of is another column there. Opportunity areas or areas that are found to be lost soon. It's now or never type stuff. And salt marsh, we'd all like to see more salt marsh restoration, but I think we can all assume that that's not really something we want to prioritize, because we're just prioritizing mangrove forests and stuff.
Yeah, so that's another conversation that we've been having as well. So like when we've gone through this exercise internally the last couple of years, the habitats that were up there as priorities were based on the ones that were in the red and trending downward. And there was only 3 the last time around, and it was a little easier to kind of like put those priorities out there. So it was seagrasses, salt marshes, and forested freshwater wetlands. Now that we've got, 7 that we can look at, we may want to change the strategy a little bit.
Risk on coastal uplands. It's a good boat as well.
Yeah, this is another one we've been making some good progress in based on the pace of restoration. Based on some of the comments I'm hearing already, it almost seems like, these kind of attainable, somewhat attainable ones, might be the ones that we need to prioritize.
Let's get there while we can, I think, because I think both of those, they're trending, but the problem is development is also trending. So who's going to win? Who's going to win on the fringes? Is the question.
So that's the whole paradigm of our habitat master plan update. We went from restoring the balance as the paradigm to maximizing the potential.
Yes, look, that restoration up map that you had, you know, the Florida Home Builders has the same map, just a different legend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that everybody's kind of pulling out these habitats that are located within that 5-foot contour reservation space too. So, you know, tidal tributaries, living shorelines, coastal uplands, they're all within that kind of danger zone when it comes to sea level rise. So that's one of the things that we wanted to consider. So it makes sense. So I've heard living shorelines,
I'll say oysters, because Tom said.
tidal tributaries, coastal uplands, and oysters.
Oysters are gonna check off a lot of those boxes. There's opportunity, there's local priority,
Mhm.
we've already seen, and there's
Yep.
funding available.
Yep.
And there's also benefit for other ecosystems nearby. So you restore the oysters, they help the water quality and seagrass and that come back together. So
And I
It's just oysters and scratching all up.
and I will say that, you know, when we're getting information from partners on their habitat restoration, you know, depending on how they describe it, it could be under the oyster bar bucket, or it could be under the living shoreline bucket, depending on how it's described too. So,
Really kind of prudent for this, because that connects to other habitat types on this list. Like, these kids.
Along the lines of
These kids, yeah.
honestly, I'm with you.
Oh,
I almost feel like there should be like a whole rate multiplier or something on, especially like the upland habitats, because it's like, if we go get like another 3/10 of an acre coastal upland somewhere. Cool. If we go out east and get something that gets that connectivity that we actually need for these things to function and we can manage it with fire by an agency that can actually get it done, I feel like that should get a lot more. Weight. It's not gonna go underwater in the near future. It's manageable and it has that landscape level knowledge to it. that-
yeah.
As much as I love these little coastal upland things. I used to do it.
Yeah, really about the ability to manage the stressors. If you have the land and you have the implementation, you have the ability to maintain it, then that's high value. Seagrass, we go plant a whole bunch of seagrass, water quality goes down. So, you know, that's a tough one, you know, so that's why I think we've eliminated that one from being a priority directly. Yeah, I think if we can evaluate the ones that are implemented and have a high chance of success, and those habitats being retained in that condition, that's the weighting, I think.
Yeah, and the other aspect of this is if we, you know, if we do decide to prioritize some of these that we really only have information from based on, you know, the restoration reporting, you know, we may need to go and find additional ways of assessing how that's going. So for example, living shorelines and tidal tributaries, you know, what are additional tools that we can use to kind of quantify how well that restoration is doing?
And by making those a priority, is that gives the ability to also look at the tidal tributaries and make sure that what we have mapped, you know, there might be another process here to say, hey, well, do we have all our tidal tributaries and opportunities well mapped?
Yeah. Well, remember that when we prioritize something in these habitat report cards, that's always going to be a priority in our, you know, Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund funding, things like that, which Jessica wanted me to tell you that opens on January 7th, just so you know. So, you know, that's something to keep in mind too. Like if you have projects that are in mind that may need additional funding, you know, that's one way to balance it as well.
This may not be a question for you, but. You know, policy, all morning session of our commission. And they wanted to know whether or not we're going to be getting results from services, you know, all the way from child welfare to environmental health. And I don't know if there's a societal agreement around what results mean in contract execution. We're throwing a lot of old structure into the wilderness. And the results are, and we're gonna need some help in the go between the staff, between Michigan and technical, to be able to describe that. And is this committee or the SUFB itself struggled with that? Telling that Tampa Bay returned $7 billion to the economy is just, it's not quantifiable in the way that local politicians are used to measuring. And I don't know, this is, it's really not this. But I want to caution us to keep that in the back of my head as we prioritize, forestry recovery or forestry wetlands along coastal forested wetlands. So what? I mean, at one point, Dave Tomasco and I said, well, on acre seagrass, then get you 25 million more fish. The second one was lost. So, well, that's a need to see. I can lock in on that. Well, I'm going to get more fish to kill us. See, we gotta get that translation between our values into values that are more identifiable or understandable by those who have been doing this money from the legislation on that. So anybody think about that? Being not here, but hopefully feeling that somewhere.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that'll be really useful for that is the Tampa Bay Community Survey that Blake, our environmental social scientist, has been doing. So I'm not sure when has he presented that at the TAC yet?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Briefly at our board meetings.
Okay. So he recently presented it at our Association of National Estuary Programs meeting a couple weeks ago. And basically, it's taking the knowledge that the community has and their values and how they intersect. So that may be one way to get at some of those questions. So
Yeah, the economic valuation study too, that we do about every 10 years tries to get at some of those questions. It's a general thing like how much does Tampa Bay contribute to the economy, but it does go into a little more specific detail about how different types of habitats contribute to that, mostly through the lens of like carbon sequestration or nitrogen filtration, like ecosystem services that could be translatable at some level. It would be meaningful to decision makers, but I agree it's oftentimes like a more of a political sell, if you will. But I think there are some tools out there that can help get there.
So I don't pause the water quality. And I'm continuing to make that tonight. How does oysters and the river take that out?
Better water quality, better marketing things. That's one way.
The jobs created or supported through the wetland environments of the coastal system. There's a report that I think was one out of every 25 jobs in the Tampa Bay area was related in some way to the health of Tampa Bay.
Yeah, that's the economic valuation
Yep.
study that we did.
I think this really comes to like, it's a science communication thing because the values are out there and they're such. There's a disconnect between people like us that show up in this room to talk about that and the people that we're talking about who aren't ever going to be in here to do this. They need something they can hang their hat on and another infringement. So I think from all of that, really what it comes down to is how we're all like, we get into this field mostly all because we came through the scientific lens. We are programmed not to throw bullshit numbers out there, and they need a bullshit number. So we need somebody to, in a very crafty, well, scientifically communicated way, give us the bullshit thing to hang our hat on and tell them, and they can understand and go, heck yeah, that's 492 fish in 30 seconds. Right. But those are the good old 50 gallons of water per oyster per day bullcrap numbers and those stuff. But it's the disconnect between hard science and the communication of it to the decision makers. Not a new problem.
Yeah.
I agree with your point, and I'm just looking at our economic evaluation dashboard, and there's some numbers on them, and you can pull them to make expected statements. Like there's one graph that has the value of X number of acres for each habitat per year in terms of how much carbon it sequesters. You can monetize that.
You do, if you're about that.
Yeah.
No, you tell me how many times that thing sequesters, like, yeah.
But put it into the monetary dollar, you know, having value that economic impact. So
Yeah, that's as good as 45 roast beef sandwiches. Let me show you.
Well, what should be equally startling is the amount or the rate of habitat loss and the rate of population expansion and the potential loss of property taxes to support emergency services, much less schools. You know, I think the flip side of it is equally startling and should be concerning with any elected politician. You know, I appreciate the service they provide. As much as it's disheartening to see how difficult this is, I'm even more alarmed by the threat of the rate of development.
So let's, in the interest of time, so that we can get to our field trip, I'm gonna get us back on task to try and maybe whittle this down to 3 priorities for the next year. So right now on the board, so far, I've had oyster bars, living shorelines, tidal tributaries, and coastal uplands mentioned. Any thoughts? Are there any others that folks want to, lobby for?
If we could split out forested freshwater wetlands, I think looking at those riverine systems that mostly have been ditched, almost mainlining agricultural runoff right to the banks. You could split that out. Those would be, and there's a lot of opportunity.
I will say that, so speaking of tidal, well, it's tough because it says tidal tributaries, right? But there are areas along tributaries higher up that are forested freshwater wetlands, which would feed into those. So there's definitely some issues with some of the bins there.
But to your point, like the National Wetlands Inventory provides that information. All using it.
If we went with things that we could actually measure with the first column, then that would bring us to oyster bars, coastal uplands, and forested freshwater uplands of those that were mentioned. And that would be kind of the first cut on our workflow. And the more defendable, I guess.
I think the thing with coastal wetlands, you're not just going to go on and say we're going to restore coastal upland without taking into consideration the fact that there's probably tidal tributaries within that mosaic of habitat.
Yeah.
So, we're picking these very distinct community types, but in reality, the way nature was, it's easy, mosaic. So you can go ahead and say coastal uplands with the assumption that part of the health of that system is going to be in tidal tributaries and coastal wetlands. Certainly wouldn't want to approach a project without being in mosaic. And cascading elevations, freshwater wetlands for resiliency through sea level rise.
The other option is to consider habitats in the 3 kind of different areas within the watershed. So a supertidal, an intertidal, and a subtidal habitat. That would be an option as well.
Thursday.
Well, I've still got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, I know Marcus has been taking notes. We have this recorded. I'd love to take your worksheets so that we can kind of compile what you've put down. And we'll come back with you. We'll come back to you guys with a proposal based on all of your input for the 3 priority habitats for the upcoming year. And then everybody that's either has been here or is online can vote on that, and we'll see where we stand.
And we are gonna share this with our technical advisory committee on the 21st of January. To get their feedback as well. So if you have more thoughts on it, do that meeting.
Yeah, and we'll definitely, send that follow-up and make sure that we kind of summarize everything that was discussed here as well. I really appreciate your candid comments and for you being here and going along with this and this new process, and hopefully it'll be useful to you and to others. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and close out of this, and Kendall, or are you starting? Okay. Sounds good. Oh, you got a new one?
Send it.
Sure. Okay. Where's this one? Ready to go. No. Oh, I mean, finish up that. Well, yeah, just say that, we need everybody. Is everybody ready? Okay, I'm Kendall Carson. I am the Environmental Lands Program Coordinator. Hannah, who was just here, actually was the coordinator when the Emerson Point expansion project was in process. So she knew a little bit more about the acquisition history, or actually the history of Emerson Point leading up to the acquisition. She knew a little bit more than I did, but she had to run and get on a meeting. So this is actually, as you know, the project location and the boundaries of the expansion. We currently are over in this area, I believe. So this is where the expansion acquisition is. And then a little bit of the history. It historically was used for agriculture, and it was agriculturally used as citrus and as well as cattle. We need to change the sharing on this so that the folks online can see it. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
While she's pulling that up, I might add that Emerson Point was acquired last year for the price of $15.5 million. That's $165,000 an acre. For the 93 and 4 acres that.
There it is. Yeah.
And that price was negotiated for 6 months.
Now we're
Coming down off of 16.5 target that one had in his pocket from the development. So it was a very difficult moment. I think so. Remember that we made it, didn't get the boy. $165,000 an acre, this dries up most along the coast. Can you answer? Okay.
And then there's also a homestead on site that was used from what we believe as an actual home site for some time, but then was also used as a fish camp for the family, for the Barron's family for several decades. The family had a strong desire for it to be kept as conservation. And then, as Charlie just mentioned, Manatee County acquired it in July of 2024 for 15.5 million, you said? Okay, because I'm not sure if people on Zoom or Teams heard what you said. Um, so do you have any other history that you might want to add to it, Charlie?
Look, other than as a uh, Florida Forever priority project, we've been on the list since 1991, 92, when the state first purchased Emerson Point itself in 1906. And each successive year and for a number of decades, contact was made with the owner and owner's family and was unsuccessful. And we felt it a great honor to be able to move the family to a decision to sell for conservation rather than the development plan that they had. Like I mentioned in that pocket, after 18 years or more of trying, it was a substantial victory for Tampa.
Awesome, great. All right, and I'm gonna turn it over to Sherry now. Who's leading the restoration efforts?
Where's my little quickie? All right, so yeah, the 97-acre parcel is shown here. You can see that it looks kind of wet, which it is. There's a parcel that is reserved for the family up in the northeast corner. But the rest of the site we'll be looking at for a preserve for Manatee County. I didn't realize we were going to be short on time so much, so I had a little bit kind of broader picture, but so I'll try to go through this real quickly. But basically, you know, this is one of the many sites that we're looking at, you know, along the coastlines, coastal parcels. We have a lot of shoreline in Manatee County, including the Gulf facing coast, but also all the rivers and tributaries. We also have the watershed. I know Damon and Ryan were mentioning the upland stuff up in the watershed. Those sites are definitely important as well. But today we're focusing on the coastal sites, Emerson Preserve being one of them. And in addition to the 365-acre Emerson Point Preserve, which we're on now, the expansion will add 97 acres. It meets our restoration for resilience kind of theme we're looking at. Oops. You know, hopefully this site will give us a nice migration corridor. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. It helps us connect terrestrial and submerged ecosystems. There are a few oyster bars too, actually off the shoreline of the newly acquired area. And then it helps us align with community resilience, providing recreational opportunities for our community. So another slide, which is a little kind of higher level, but also I'll go through it quick. But basically, we're looking at 5 ways to kind of focus on our coastal resiliency and shoreline resiliency. The first of which is acquiring these lands, which Kendall talked about. Then we get to the restoring part. We look for opportunities to restore the lands. We just finished our scope with Black and Beach, and we're looking forward to starting some restoration out on this site very soon. Not sure if there'll be opportunities for oyster restoration out there, but there are oysters right off the shoreline. Why do I keep doing that? And then those other two don't necessarily go to this one. So this shows Emerson Point, but it also shows several of our other coastal preserves, including Crooked River, which I think might have been talked about here at one point, along the Manatee River. This is just one of the larger ones. So to quickly get into what we're talking about today, Emerson expansion, how it fits with our restoration for resilience kind of theme. It does our coastal defense, so getting coastal lands that we can put in preservation or conservation. for migration corridors. This one in particular goes along Terracea Bay, which is an aquatic preserve. It helps with our community resilience for quality of life. This one will have passive recreational trails and fishing opportunities. Also, like Emerson Preserve, there are cultural and indigenous resources along the shoreline that will be protected. And then the habitat restoration, like I said, we're just getting started on that. I didn't do that. For the ecosystem resilience, we'll be looking for opportunities to do hydrologic repairs. There are many ditches along the edge, like rim ditches almost, and some through it, including the one through the middle there. Looking at ways to soften those, provide some sort of ecological restoration to make them function more as tidal creeks. And this area is really interesting. A lot of them come out and braid out into here. So possible opportunities there, which there's an oyster bar there. There's the other one there, the two I mentioned. There are tarpon already in a lot of these ponds at various times. So kind of respecting that and finding ways to enhance that value. You saw from the first image that it's very wet site, but we are going to set up some of the areas for coastal uplands. I think they will transform pretty quickly to it's just that the site will be very dry when we're out there today, but it gets extremely wet, like almost the entire site. I've been out there. And then the last one, if there are opportunities to find some of the higher upland areas, work for opportunities to add more prickly pear. I think, Damon, I don't know if you spearheaded the prickly pear that's out at Emerson.
Oh, the prickly apple.
Prickly apple, yeah.
I was like, yes.
So hopefully opportunities more for that here, because this is an area where it was known to be. Sorry? I think that's where the ones here actually came from, except they ended up having to be switched out because they were the wrong ones, right? Yeah. Long story. So one of the cool things about it is it's next to a preserve that already has amenities. We're sitting in the visitor center / many other things building now. So Emerson expansion will have more passive trails and boardwalks, wildlife viewing, some fishing opportunities. The hardened stuff will be pervious parking and restrooms, and then an educational pavilion. So other than that, it'll be pretty primitive site. So on to the field trip. We have 3 points of interest, if you will. Like Ryan said, it's not done. So you kind of have to imagine when you're out there, but we have 3 points of interest to visit if you would like. Number one, that's where some of the tarpon have been seen. Number 2, there's an old connection to Terracea Bay. And number 3 is a mangrove area that catches everyone's eye because it's shaped a bit like a heart. So that is all we have. Sorry, I'm losing my voice.
So thank you, Sherry. All this. Right. Thanks, everybody. We're going to say goodbye to our online folks, and we're going to go out tromping in the woods. Have a good afternoon.